Hi guys, well I just returned from 2 weeks visiting my family in the US and I've got a lot to share with you. The garden is crazy wild right now, and as you can see behind me, the grow bags are, well, they've taken off quite a lot too. But I will save all of that for a video next week, because today I'm just going to take a quick moment to share with you how to troubleshoot your pepper plants. Now this is a make or break time for growing pepper plants, and there are quite a few little problems that can arise this time of year that can be easily fixed before the plants start to set their fruit. Now I'm going to touch on what to do if your pepper plants are stunted. I'm going to also talk about what to do if the leaves are curling or yellowing, and I'll also touch on some of the common pests for your pepper plants. So let's get started. Now this is our time here for transplanting our pepper plants outside. So as you can see kind of here around me, I have quite a few different pepper plants and seedlings, but I'm going to start with these two that I overwintered last year. Now these guys were doing great before I left, but as you can see here, they're looking a little worse for wear now after my 2 weeks away. So we're going to put on our detective hat and start troubleshooting these guys. So the first thing that I notice when I'm looking at this pepper plant is that there is a lot of leaf curl. Now leaf curl is a sign of stress or distress. When I see leaf curl in my plants, but especially my pepper plants, I always start by looking for insects. And here what I do is I actually look at the underside of the leaves. And so you just literally have to go through the leaves and see if there are any insects. Now sometimes you'll actually see holes or little nibble marks in it, but not always. Leaf curl is very commonly associated with aphids, so I do want to look at the young fresh leaves to make sure that they're all clear. But the second thing that you want to look for is you want to look at the soil. So those are the two kind of things. Look at the underside of the leaves and look at anything kind of crawling around in the soil that shouldn't be there. These two, my overwintered peppers, are clean, but this guy actually does have something showing up on the underside of the leaves. But before I go into that, let's go ahead and finish with these overwintered peppers. The second thing I notice is that these leaves are yellow. So they're not only a little bit curled, but they are yellow as well. And I know that this plant was very green and healthy when I left. So heavy. When I left, these plants were a nice rich green, but the yellowing on the leaves points to a condition called chlorosis, which is when a plant is unable to take up the nutrients in the soil, and this is often a result of overwatering. Now during my absence, I chose to use my new RainPoint Smart Water Timer for my garden out there, which meant that that garden is in great shape, but this garden I had to use my old manual timer, which I set it on an every 3-day cycle. But I do know from my phone app for my smart water timer that the watering schedule was actually delayed in the garden 3 times due to rain. So that means that these guys were all getting watered probably more than they actually needed to be. And what you didn't see here is when I just picked up this pot, you see that? For peppers, overwatering can be a real problem. And here's how you treat overwatering. And before you skip ahead, it's not simply watering your plant less. Number one, if my plant leaves were damaged, I would actually prune them. Peppers are really resilient in the fact that they're a lot like tomatoes and they can grow out new leaves and new shoots quite easily. So trimming off a few leaves is not a problem. In my case here, the leaves look great. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to move it to a place that is not going to get any water. I want them to dry out before I water them again. Now the second thing I'm going to do is reduce their direct sunlight exposure over the next few days to give them a little bit of time to recover. After a few days, let's say probably 5 to 7 days, I'm going to start reintroducing them to direct sunlight. And at that point, I'll also give them a slow release balanced NPK fertilizer. And that should be all that's required to get these two guys back on track. But now let's go back to that plant that also had the curled leaves that I spotted something that shouldn't be there. Okay, so this one, when I was flipping over the leaf, I spotted aphids on this and eggs. Whoops, there's one right there. The aphids were only on 2 of the leaves, and since this is a tiny plant, then I just chose the squish it method. And literally you just take your finger and kind of brush it over the leaves and squish the aphids. I know it sounds gross, but it's really effective. If this had been a larger plant or it had been a larger infestation, in that case I would have used an organic insecticide. Now here in France, my favorite thing to use is a black soap, or savon noir as they call it here, mixture. Now if you're living someplace where black soap is not an option, then I would recommend that you use a few drops of dish soap in warm water and spray that on your plants. Now here, you can't see this very easily on the plant, so I'm going to show you right here on a piece of paper. I don't know if you can see that little red dot that's moving. Now that can be easily mistaken for another common pest for pepper plants and also a very detrimental one. So I will come back to that in just a moment. But first, I did promise at the beginning of the video to talk to you about your stunted pepper plants or your stunted seedlings and tell you what to do about that. What do you notice different about these two plants? As you can see by this very simple comparison, this one is much bigger than this one. What I did right before I left is I did pot up my pepper plants. This one got potted up, but I was just really running out of time, and so I potted it into a little pot that I had taken something else out of, I think, where this one actually got a good sized pot to go into. As you can see, they really adjust to the size of the pot that you're putting them in. Now, I don't recommend that you just throw them into a bucket, because a lot of times they just don't know what to do with all that extra space and the roots can't get enough water and so on and so forth. So I do recommend that you gradually kind of increase the pot size for them. That said, this guy is stunted. He's not going to get any bigger than this unless I move him up to a bigger pot or go ahead and plant him out in the garden. And you'll be amazed, once you move even a small pepper plant like this to a bigger home, you should see explosive growth within a couple of weeks. Okay, now back to those red dots. I'm actually going to show you on this avocado plant because it's easier to see than on the pepper plant, but it's the same thing. If you see these little moving red dots, you might be tempted to think that these are red spider mites. Red spider mites can really be detrimental to a plant, but how to test and tell the difference between them? I'm actually just going to pull one off in my hand here. The test is if you touch it, if you kind of squish it, yes, again, I know that's really gross, but if you squish it and it leaves a red stain, then it's not a spider mite, it's actually a clover mite. Unlike spider mites, clover mites are, they're just kind of more of a nuisance. And because I know that pests are a huge problem this time of year, I made this video just for you.